Tonight we're heading back, far back, to the winding banks of the Nile, where the moon casts its silver light over the slow-moving river and papyrus rustles gently in the warm desert air. You're standing barefoot on cool stone, outside a home lit with flickering oil lamps. Inside, behind soft linen curtains, someone sings an old song about longing and reunion. It's late, but the city of Thebes still murmurs with life, lovers whispering beneath fig trees, dancers returning from a feast, and priestesses finishing rituals to honor the gods of love. You're here to learn about something deeply human, something eternal. What was S3X really like in ancient Egypt? You might think of stone pyramids, rigid hieroglyphs, and dry desert sand, but love, desire, romance? Yes, those too. And they were far more colorful, strange, and, dare we say, modern than you might expect. But be warned, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes there, not with all the incense, heat, and mysterious customs swirling around you. Before we begin tonight's journey through history, I have a small favor to ask. If you're enjoying this peaceful corner of the past, please consider giving the video a like or subscribing to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming nighttime adventures. It truly helps this little channel grow, and it means so much to me. If you're still awake enough to type a few words, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. I find it so heartwarming to see history gently unfolding across time zones, quietly shared together. I sincerely hope this historical story is gentle enough to ease you into sleep, but there's always a small risk. It might be too interesting. And if you do happen to stay awake through the whole thing, at least you'll walk away with a bit of new knowledge. And if that's what keeps you up tonight, well, I'd say that's worth it. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the heart of Thebes, in the New Kingdom, around 1300 BCE. The streets are narrow and winding, the air rich with perfume and crushed herbs. You pass a woman applying a lotus-scented oil behind her ears as she walks to a gathering. You catch the scent of sweet beer and roasted goose drifting from a house where someone's birthday, or perhaps a fertility rite, is being celebrated. In this world, desire is sacred. It's not hidden or whispered about in shameful tones. It's celebrated, painted on walls, written into songs, and wrapped up with the gods themselves. Love, passion, and reproduction are part of the divine fabric of life. You stroll past a shrine where Hathor, goddess of music, beauty, and love, is worshipped. Her statue is draped in fresh flowers, and the scent of myrrh hangs heavy. Young couples leave offerings, dates, wine, even little carved hearts, hoping to catch her favor. And why wouldn't they? Hathor was believed to help people fall in love, to keep marriages strong, and even to assist in conception. Down the street, you find a group of women preparing for a festival. Their coal-lined eyes sparkle, and they laugh as they decorate each other's wigs with flowers. One of them pauses to tie a red ribbon around her wrist, a charm said to bring passion into the home. Another woman wears a broad collar made of glazed beads, a gift from her partner, and as she tells the story of how they met, you can't help but smile. It's charming, it's familiar, and just like that, you realize this isn't so different from now. You wander into a quieter part of town, where a scribe's house sits near a grove of date palms. Inside, by the glow of a flickering lamp, He's writing on papyrus, not government records or trade tallies, but poetry, lines meant to be whispered between lovers in the dark. He dips his reed pen and writes, "Your voice, it gladdens my heart like wine. Your touch stirs me more than sweet beer." You glance at the scroll. It's delicate, playful, and surprisingly steamy. The ancient Egyptians weren't shy in their metaphors. They talked of diving into the marsh, plucking the lotus, and entering the house of sweetness. Historians still argue whether some of these were just poetic phrases or clear euphemisms. But one thing is certain, the passion was real, and they celebrated it openly. You step back into the warmth of the evening, and overhead, the stars begin to emerge. In ancient Egypt, even the sky was tied to intimacy. The goddess Nut arched over the earth god Geb, their eternal closeness held apart by the air god Shu. Their divine yearning echoed across human hearts. Night after night, lovers would gaze at the stars and see their own longing reflected above. A young couple sits nearby, sharing a small cup of wine. The girl wears a blue faience amulet shaped like a frog, symbol of fertility. She teases him, pretending to steal his bread, and he laughs. There's nothing grand about this moment. No temple, no priest, no poetry, just two people, flirting under the stars. You realize, for all their gods and rituals, the Egyptians also just loved being in love. Not everything was romantic, of course. There were rules, taboos, and fears too. But tonight, here under the palms, the tone is soft, gentle, like a lullaby sung in hieroglyphs. As you lean back into the night, you hear the river again, soft, steady, eternal. It flows just as it did then, carrying whispers, kisses, and secrets downstream. And this is only the beginning. You don't get very far in ancient Egypt without bumping into a god, or five. And when it comes to love, passion, and the tangled webs of intimacy, you quickly realize that the gods were not distant, aloof figures floating somewhere above. No, here. The gods were in your bed, in your dreams, in the oils you anointed your body with, and in the very air you breathe during a kiss. As you walk along the edge of a temple courtyard, you spot a carving on the sandstone wall. It's old, weathered, but unmistakable. A pair of deities, Isis and Osiris, locked in a tender embrace. This wasn't just mythology. Their union had cosmic consequences. Osiris had been killed and dismembered by his jealous brother, but Isis, his wife, painstakingly reassembled his body, except for one part, which she had to recreate with magic. From their divine union came Horus, god of kingship and protection. A love story, yes, but also a powerful myth that taught generations that life, and even dynastic rule, sprang from desire, loss, and rebirth. You step back from the relief, letting your eyes trace the smooth lines of ancient figures locked in ageless gestures. They weren't ashamed to show it. In fact, they carved it into their temples. To the ancient Egyptians, S3X was an act that mirrored the divine. It wasn't hidden behind closed doors or restricted to private shame. It was celebrated, ritualized, and, at times, required. You learn that in some temples, rituals involved reenactments of divine unions, acts of symbolic intimacy meant to renew the fertility of the land. It's strange to think of something so personal playing out under the gaze of priests and incense smoke. But in this culture, it was a holy offering. You hear whispers of another pair of gods, Geb and Nut, their story pulses through everything. Geb, the god of the earth, lies beneath Nut, the goddess of the sky, her body arched overhead. They loved each other with such intensity that the god of air, Shu, had to pry them apart. That moment, the separation of sky and earth, is said to be the beginning of time itself. Every morning, as the sun rose between Nut's thighs, rebirth happened again. The way the Egyptians saw it, intimacy wasn't just life, it was order. It was how the world continued. Without it, the cycle of the cosmos might collapse. You stop beside a young temple singer preparing for an evening ritual. Her hands are perfumed, her skin oiled, her linen gown almost translucent in the fading light. She isn't just dressing for beauty. She's becoming Hathor for a few hours. She smiles as she sings to a small crowd, her voice like warm honey. Through her song, people remember the passion of the gods, the sweetness of connection, and the joy of being mortal. And yet, even with all this openness, there are lines you're not supposed to cross. Stories are whispered of gods who strayed, of forbidden lusts that brought plagues or chaos. One tale involves Set, the god of disorder, and his disturbing attempt to dominate his nephew Horus, not out of love, but to assert power. The myth is graphic, unsettling, and scholars still debate what it all means. Historians still argue whether such stories were cautionary tales, morality plays, or simply raw reflections of the complexities of human behavior projected onto divine figures. Whatever the reason, it's clear, even the gods didn't always get intimacy right. You move along the temple wall, running your fingers over a row of hieroglyphs that once adorned a sacred chamber. A scribe translates for you in a quiet voice. May you make love joyfully in the field of reeds. May your union bring light, not fire. Even the afterlife wasn't exempt. The field of reeds, Egypt's paradise, was not a lonely, sterile place. It was a continuation of joy, a place where reunited lovers could walk hand in hand forever, where pleasures of the body were not forbidden, but eternal. You stroll out of the temple just as the stars begin to prick the sky. In the distance, you hear a wedding procession winding through the streets, drums, flutes, laughter, two newlyweds, wrapped in garlands, glowing with perfume and hope, begin their life together under the watchful eye of the gods. What strikes you is how intertwined everything is, heaven and earth, body and spirit, mortal and divine. There was no harsh boundary between the sacred and the sensual. To love someone was to participate in the workings of the universe. To lie with them was to echo what the gods had done at the beginning of time. And yet, even in this world of carvings and rituals, you sense something tender and unspoken. A woman pressing a bead necklace into her lover's hand. A man sketching a lotus flower on a pot he knows she'll use. A quiet glance between two people in the market. Not everything was grand myth. Much of it was just human. You find yourself returning to that image of Nut arched across the sky. Her body stretches over the entire world, stars glittering from her skin. Every night, she swallows the sun and births it again each dawn. The Egyptians believed she cradled every soul beneath her, wrapping them in darkness, in warmth, in eternity. And as you walk back toward the Nile, its waters whispering secrets under the moon, you realize something. In ancient Egypt, the gods didn't watch from above. They watched from within. In the scent of lilies crushed into oil, in the flicker of a lover's smile, in the breathless hush between two joined hearts, And they're still here, in a way, waiting quietly in stone and scroll, ready to be remembered. You follow the procession away from the wedding music, down a quieter road paved with worn limestone blocks. The scent of night-blooming jasmine trails behind the passing celebrants. But your path turns inward, toward the place where body, spirit, and sacred duty collided in the most unexpected of ways. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera rises before you, solemn and majestic in the moonlight. Tall columns shaped like bundled papyrus tower above you, their capitals carved with the serene face of the goddess herself. Her smile is soft, almost knowing, like she's seen everything and judged none of it. Here, inside these stone walls, pleasure was not sinful. It was ritual. It was holy. You slip through a narrow passage, worn smooth by generations of bare feet, and enter a room lit by flickering torches. A group of women dressed in fine linen move in practiced silence. Some carry trays of oils and ointments. Others tend to basins of fragrant water. At the center stands a woman, barefoot, her dark hair braided with lapis beads. She is not a priestess in the traditional sense, but a vessel. Tonight, she embodies Hathor. The rituals that take place in temples like this are not for the public. They are private, symbolic acts of union between God and goddess, played out through chosen intermediaries. The woman at the center of the room begins a slow, undulating dance, her body swaying like reeds in a breeze. Each movement mimics creation, renewal, the merging of divine energies. You sit quietly in the corner, the air thick with incense and rose oil, and watch the ceremony unfold like a whispered dream. There's no vulgarity here, only intention, reverence, and a deep understanding that the body, too, can be an instrument of worship. In certain rites, it's said, high priests and priestesses took on the roles of divine lovers, not merely reenacting but invoking the passion of gods. Whether these acts were literal or symbolic is still debated. Some scholars believe they were metaphoric dances. Others argue physical unions may have occurred as ritualized acts of cosmic renewal. Historians still argue whether these sacred unions were witnessed or kept behind closed veils. But either way, the purpose was the same: to bring balance and life to the world. You pass through another chamber, walls lined with carvings of fertility symbols, frogs, seeds, naked figures entwined beneath the protective gaze of goddesses. In one relief, Hathor plays a sistrum as she receives the attention of Horus. In another, a simple reed mat becomes the site of celestial reunion. Here, the act of pleasure was not shameful. It was generative, a reenactment of the moment the world was born. Some believe that temple rituals ensured the flooding of the Nile, the fertility of crops, the health of the pharaoh. To deny that power, or to view it as base, would have been unthinkable. You pause beside a painted pillar. At its base, a small alcove holds a bowl of fresh figs and dates, placed as offerings. A young acolyte kneels there, whispering a prayer in soft tones. She's asking for love, for connection, for the warmth of another's embrace. Not marriage necessarily, but companionship, touch, recognition. The kind of closeness even gods might envy. It wasn't just about procreation, you realize. While fertility was sacred, so too was pleasure itself. There was space in Egyptian thought for love without children, for touch without obligation. As long as it was done with respect for the body, the partner, and the gods, it was seen as part of the human experience. Outside the temple, you find a quiet garden enclosed by sandstone walls. In the moonlight, you see couples sitting together on stone benches, their fingers interlaced, heads resting against one another. There's a peacefulness to their closeness, and you wonder if they'd just come from the temple, or perhaps from a nearby home where similar rituals, though less formal, were unfolding. You recall stories told by the elders of women who served as sacred companions in temples, offering not just physical presence, but emotional connection. They were respected, protected, and seen as channels through which divine energy flowed. These women, often mischaracterized in modern eyes, held a deeply spiritual role. To lie with one was not a transaction, but a blessing, a way to be healed, inspired, or reborn. Of course, not all of this was perfectly equal. As with all human cultures, hierarchies and power dynamics played a role. Access to certain rights may have been reserved for elites. Not everyone was allowed inside the temple's inner rooms. But even so, the idea that intimacy could be spiritual, that pleasure could be holy, was not limited to kings. As the night deepens, you return to the edge of the temple complex. From above, the stars shimmer like grains of gold dust scattered across black linen. You think again of Hathor, goddess of beauty, dance, love, and joy, smiling from every painted pillar. Her temple wasn't a place of silence and guilt. It was a sanctuary of music, laughter, and touch. And perhaps that's the most surprising part of all, that in a world so ancient, with its mummies and monuments, its crocodiles and curses, you find a view of S3X that's open, celebratory, and soft, no shame, no fear, only rhythm, ritual, and the deep, warm understanding that the body is a bridge to others, to the divine, to life itself. As you step away from the sacred precincts, the scent of frankincense clings to your skin, and your thoughts linger on what you've witnessed. Not a spectacle, not something to fear, just a sacred choreography, ancient and yet somehow comfortingly familiar. You wander farther from the temple now, your skin still scented with frankincense, your mind full of soft tambourines and glances exchanged in torchlight. But the quiet reverence of the sacred chambers begins to fade as you hear something else in the distance. Drums, laughing, singing, the kind of joy that spills into the streets and makes you want to dance. Whether you know the steps or not, it's festival night. And not just any festival. You've arrived just in time for the Feast of Drunkenness, one of the most celebrated and most misunderstood rituals in ancient Egyptian life. You step around a corner and suddenly find yourself swept into a scene that feels more like a block party than a ceremony. Flames flicker in tall braziers. Musicians with flutes and hand drums play syncopated rhythms that make your shoulders sway almost involuntarily. Children dart between adults who wear crowns of lotus petals and garlands of palm leaves. Clay cups are passed around freely, filled with warm, honey-sweet beer. And at the center of it all, laughter, the kind that comes from deep inside, that makes your eyes crinkle and your stomach ache. It's a joy so full, it makes your heart ache just a little. You ask a passing vendor what's being celebrated, and he grins. The night humanity tricked Sekhmet, he says, and offers you a fig. You bite into it as he begins the story. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and retribution, had once grown furious with humanity, so furious, in fact, that she began destroying everything. Cities, fields, people. Nothing was safe. Her rage could not be calmed until the gods, fearing the end of creation, devised a strange and clever plan. They filled thousands of jugs with beer, dyed red to resemble blood, and poured them over the land. Sekhmet, mistaking it for the spilled remains of her enemies, drank until she became intoxicated and fell asleep. When she awoke, her fury had passed. To honor that moment, the night the world was saved through joy and drink, Egyptians gathered every year to laugh, dance, and drink themselves into a kind of divine silliness. But this wasn't just about beer. It was about catharsis, release, a kind of ritual unburdening of the soul. As you sip from a cool clay cup, you begin to feel it, the shedding of tension, the opening of the senses. You're not getting drunk to forget, but to connect, to the people around you, to the gods, to joy itself. You notice that as the night deepens, the music slows just slightly. The dancing becomes more fluid, more intimate. Lovers begin to circle each other in the firelight. Fingers graze arms, foreheads touch. The laughter becomes softer, warmer. This was also a time for fertility, for conceiving children, yes, but also for planting new dreams, for healing wounds, for letting go. Couples hoping for children would attend the festival together, bringing amulets shaped like frogs or cowrie shells, symbols of birth and abundance. A woman beside you pulls a small carved statuette from her sash, an image of Taweret, the hippo-shaped goddess of childbirth. She kisses it gently and tucks it back against her chest. She doesn't say anything, but her eyes close as she listens to the rhythm of the drums. Historians still argue whether these festivals were orgiastic in nature or simply celebratory. Ancient writings describe intoxicated joy and waking with love beside the reeds. But the tone is never lewd. It's tender, reverent, human. If there were passionate encounters, they were not performed as spectacle. They were quiet, woven into the festival's rhythm like drum beats under song. Nearby, a group of women sit in a circle, passing a bowl of dates and humming a chant. You catch the words, something about desire, about life flowing from one heart to another. One of them begins to dance, arms swaying like river grass. She catches your eye and smiles, then twirls away into the dark. The priestesses of Hathor were often present at festivals like this, not to perform rites, but to guide the emotional current of the crowd. They led the songs, blessed the offerings, and sometimes simply sat with those who needed comfort. Their presence was like the cool shadow of a palm tree, soothing, steady, and quietly powerful. You follow a group walking toward the riverbank, where lanterns float gently on the surface of the Nile. Couples whisper wishes and place small tokens into the water. Hair ribbons, carved charms, tiny bundles of herbs. The lanterns drift together, glowing like constellations reflected on the current. Someone beside you murmurs, "May our love be as steady as the Nile." Not everyone here is partnered. You notice older women laughing with their friends, young men playing music for no one in particular, children weaving garlands to crown the heads of strangers. The festival welcomes all. It's not about possession or pairing. It's about belonging. As the firelight flickers lower, you settle beside a stone wall and take in the scene. Everything glows, cheeks flushed with warmth, lips stained with wine, eyelids heavy with contentment. There's no shame here, no pretense, just humans being allowed to feel good. And maybe that was the point all along. The Feast of Drunkenness wasn't just a celebration of divine mercy or a warning about goddess-fueled destruction. It was a reminder. that joy can save you, that laughter has power, that the body, when treated with care and kindness, becomes a temple all its own. You lean your head back and listen to the last chords of the lyre being strummed nearby. The player hums softly, eyes closed. He's not performing. He's remembering. Or maybe dreaming. The night stretches on, rich with closeness and memory, and as the last lantern floats into the distance, casting its reflection across the inky black water, you feel something ancient stir inside you. Not just curiosity, not just wonder, but connection. And the comfort of knowing that, thousands of years ago, under this same moon, someone else laughed just like this, held someone just like this, felt joy just like this. The festival finally fades into silence, the last embers flickering low as the river swallows the floating lanterns one by one. You rise slowly, the scent of crushed figs and spilled beer clinging to your skin. The laughter still echoes faintly behind you, but ahead, beyond the city streets, something more guarded awaits. You begin the long walk toward the palace. It stands tall on the horizon, lit by torchlight and moonlight, rising from the earth like a stone mirage. Unlike the open joy of the temples or the carefree intimacy of the festival, the palace breathes in whispers. Its walls aren't carved with dancing figures or love poems, but with symbols of authority, lineage, and divine right. You pass between two colossal statues of lions, silent sentinels with eyes that gleam in the dark. A guard nods solemnly as you approach. You're no threat, just a quiet traveler in a city that's already gone to sleep. Inside, everything changes. Here, intimacy is not spontaneous. It's strategic. Every union is a matter of bloodlines, alliances, and appearances. In the court of the pharaoh, S3X is never just about desire. It is law, it is inheritance, it is the shaping of dynasties. You move softly through the inner halls, cool underfoot, where wide columns support ceilings painted like night skies. Servants pass without sound. You notice them glance down, not from fear, but from habit. No one meets a royal gaze unless invited. At the far end of the hall, through intricately painted doors, is the pharaoh's private chamber. You don't enter, but you hear stories from a maidservant dusting the corridor. Her voice is soft, barely louder than a breath. The pharaoh, she says, may have one great wife, his queen, his partner in ceremony, the woman crowned beside him during festivals and immortalized in carvings. But behind that formality is a complex web of concubines, diplomatic brides, and occasional lovers. You think of Ramses II, who fathered over 100 children, or Amenhotep III, whose harem was said to house foreign princesses gifted as part of peace treaties. In their world, marriage wasn't always about love. It was often about cementing political alliances. A princess from Mitanni or Babylon could become a royal consort, her presence a symbol of truce. And yet, power didn't always belong solely to the men. You hear a whisper about Nefertiti, not just the beautiful face in limestone, but a woman of remarkable influence, possibly co-ruling Egypt with Akhenaten. Some suggest she even took the throne alone, reappearing as the mysterious pharaoh Neferneferuaten. There's Hatshepsut, too, a queen who became king, whose reign included temple building, trade, and likely careful control of her image and relationships. Even within a male-dominated court, royal women wielded soft power, sometimes through ceremony, sometimes through seduction, and often through sheer brilliance. You peek into the antechamber of what appears to be a harem, not the fantasy of modern imagination, but a highly organized institution. The term harem doesn't even come from Egyptian language. It's a label added much later. Here, these women are called the House of the Royal Children, and they live under the watchful eyes of attendants, educators, and physicians. Some will never meet the pharaoh. Others might become his companions for a season, and a rare few might rise, through charm, wit, or fate, to become queens. It's easy to assume jealousy filled these walls, but the records are strangely silent on that. Perhaps the relationships were more complex, rivalry mixed with camaraderie, ambition tempered by tradition. After all, these women weren't just beauties. Many were educated, musical, artistic, raised in elite households and trained for diplomacy as much as intimacy. You hear a soft chime. Someone's playing a harp nearby. In a shaded courtyard, a woman sits beside a small pool, plucking at golden strings while another braids her hair. Their laughter floats through the air like flower petals, gentle and private, despite the structure, despite the rules. Moments of tenderness still existed. You learn of letters, real ones, written between kings and queens, pharaohs and consorts. One reads, "I send you honey, as sweet as your voice, as soft as your touch." Another ends simply, "May your arms welcome me again before the flood comes." These weren't state proclamations. They were love notes, scribbled in hurried strokes, folded between baskets of pomegranates or tucked into sandals for a journey across the Nile. Historians still argue whether the pharaohs truly loved or if their affections were curated performances. But the presence of poetry, private tombs for favored wives, and sweet inscriptions in less formal settings suggests that among all the dynastic duty, real intimacy flickered. You walk past a mural now, one that catches your breath. It's faded, but you can just make it out. A pharaoh reclining beside a woman, not in royal regalia, but in simple robes, their faces close, her hand resting against his chest. There is no throne, no gold, no crown, just a moment of quiet closeness, captured in pigment and preserved for eternity. The more you explore these private spaces, the clearer it becomes. Here in the palace, intimacy lived a double life, public and private, political and personal, mandated and improvised. You pass a young scribe carrying a scroll. He pauses and says, half smiling, "Even kings need love poems," then disappears into the corridor like a shadow. And you wonder, perhaps behind every statue of power, every decree etched in stone, there was also a softer story never told aloud. A concubine singing to herself while brushing her hair. A pharaoh watching the moon from his window, thinking of someone no longer near. A queen laying her hand on her husband's shoulder, not out of duty, but from habit, from care, from time. Intimacy here was a tool, but it was also a need. And in the hush of the palace, amid all its grandeur, you realize that even the most powerful people in history longed for the same things we do now: companionship, comfort, warmth at the end of a long day. The torchlight dims, and a breeze moves through the hall, fluttering the edge of a curtain. The harp has stopped. Footsteps retreat, and you, too, begin to retreat from the world of the pharaohs, where love could crown queens, but also live quietly in shadows, between glances, between sighs, between the lines of a half-finished poem. You step out of the palace's marble quiet and return to the clay streets of Thebes, where life feels less rehearsed, less ceremonial. Here, the flicker of lamps comes from family courtyards, not throne rooms, and the air smells of baking bread and damp linen instead of myrrh and politics. This is where most Egyptians lived, not in grandeur, but in close quarters, surrounded by neighbors, cousins, children, and goats that wandered in and out like they owned the place. You slip into the alleys of the artisans' quarter, where the streets are narrower, and voices float in warm waves through reed-shaded windows. In one home, a man is weaving sandals while his wife grinds grain. Their shoulders bump occasionally, and each time, one of them smiles. There's no fanfare, no ceremony, just the quiet, lived-in intimacy of people who have spent years knowing each other deeply and still choosing each other daily. Marriage in ancient Egypt wasn't just a legal agreement. It was more of a social and emotional contract. There were no formal ceremonies required by law, no rings or official officiants. A man and woman could be considered married as soon as they began living together and presenting themselves publicly as husband and wife. It was refreshingly straightforward and surprisingly modern. You hear laughter next door, a group of women preparing for a young bride's move into her husband's home. They're oiling her hair, braiding charms into her jewelry, teasing her gently. One of them holds up a piece of papyrus and begins to read aloud. It's a love poem, written from wife to husband. Your love fills my heart like the flood fills the fields, and I wait for your voice as I wait for the sun. The others sigh and giggle. It's sweet and a little shy. The bride hides her face behind a palm, but her smile gives her away. You duck around to the back of the house, where a grandmother is telling stories to a circle of children. She speaks of how, when she was a girl, she fell in love with the boy who used to bring water jars to market. They were married for 30 years. When he died, she says, she lit a lamp every night beside his old sandals for a whole season. Love, in all its forms, joyful, grieving, playful, was recognized, and marriage could be romantic, even without mythic proportions. But then, you hear a whispered name. Aset, someone says, shaking their head. Still sneaking off to that scribe's house? And just like that, you realize that marriage here wasn't always monogamous, at least not in practice. Though social ideals encouraged loyalty and harmony, reality, like everywhere, was messier. You follow the thread and find yourself at the edge of a garden, where a man sits writing under a fig tree. A woman approaches quietly, places a clay jar at his feet, and leans in close. They talk in low voices, and though she wears the ringed sash of a married woman, there's no mistaking the tilt of her body toward his. She lingers longer than she should. When she finally leaves, he picks up the jar and runs his hand over the rim, absently, like he's memorizing the shape of her touch. There were words in ancient Egyptian for adultery, nefet, hemut, and there were consequences when such things became public scandals. But in many cases, discretion was more important than denial. A quiet affair might be ignored if it didn't disrupt the household, if it brought shame or broke trust. It could end in divorce. Yes, divorce was not uncommon. Either partner could initiate it, and property was often split fairly. A woman could return to her father's home or strike out on her own. She retained rights to her dowry, and if children were involved, custody arrangements varied. It wasn't painless, of course, but it was possible, and that in itself feels remarkable for the time. You pass a document posted outside the home of a merchant, a marriage agreement drawn in ink and sealed with personal marks. It outlines property rights, expectations, even emotional commitments. If she bears me children, one line reads, I shall care for them and for her all the days of my life. If she grows ill, I shall provide. Another line adds gently, if she returns to her people, she shall go with dignity and her sandals. Historians still argue whether such agreements were the norm or exceptions reserved for wealthier classes. But their existence tells you something vital, that the Egyptians valued structure in their relationships, and that affection and legality were not mutually exclusive. You're drawn into a courtyard where an older man is telling jokes while cleaning fish. His wife calls from inside, teasing him about ruining dinner. I told you not to use that dull blade. He mutters something back, but there's laughter beneath the complaint. They bicker, they tease, but the rhythm between them is undeniable. It's a dance perfected over years. Nearby, a group of teenage girls whisper about a boy who works near the harbor. He says he writes poetry, one of them says, giggling behind her scarf. Another snorts. They all say that, but then she pauses. He gave me a lotus blossom. The others fall quiet for a moment. That means something here. A lotus isn't just pretty. It's a symbol of rebirth, of beauty, of delicate invitation, the kind of gift that asks a question without words. As you sit with them, listening to the rise and fall of conversation, you realize that in this city built of stone and legacy, ordinary love was everywhere, in papyrus notes, in shared chores, in jealousy, forgiveness, and second chances. It wasn't perfect. People made mistakes. They betrayed. They reconciled. Some relationships were tender. Others were transactional. But through it all, there was a thread, a quiet, persistent belief that partnership, when nurtured, was sacred in its own way, even if it didn't last forever, even if it was complicated, even if someone still visited the scribe's house on quiet afternoons. You step out onto the street again, the sky turning a deep indigo overhead. A dog barks in the distance. A baby cries. Somewhere, someone is falling in love. Again. And you begin to understand. In ancient Egypt, love was not rare. It was daily, domestic, flawed, and all the more precious for it. As you walk deeper into the artisan quarter, morning begins to stir. The sky softens into a pale gold, and a gentle breeze drifts in from the river, lifting the edge of your tunic. The city is quieter now, resting, digesting the joys and secrets of the night before. A young boy runs past you, clutching a small scroll, barefoot and laughing. He disappears behind a curtain of woven reeds, leaving you curious. You follow slowly, your sandals kicking up a little dust, until you find yourself in a modest scribe's workshop, walls lined with baskets of papyrus, ink blocks, and carved reed pens. It smells of ink and damp earth, and something sweeter, maybe honey, or the faint memory of crushed lotus petals. Inside, a man sits hunched over a scroll, tongue pressed gently to his lip, eyes narrowed in concentration. He doesn't notice you at first. He's not writing taxes or temple records. He's copying something soft, almost musical. When he looks up, he gestures for you to come closer. You kneel beside him as he unfurls the scroll. In careful, elegant hieratic script, you read the first line aloud. It is her voice that brings me bread, her glance that gives me wine. He smiles. From the Chester Beatty collection, he says quietly, though he wouldn't have called it that back then. Just one of many love poems shared among the living, and sometimes tucked away with the dead. You hold the scroll gently. These aren't the grand declarations of gods or kings. They are intimate fragments, passed from one beating heart to another. Some written by men, some by women, some with no name at all, just feeling, drifting like perfume across centuries. You read another, I want to be the laundryman of my beloved, to wash her clothes and touch her arms in the cool water. You smile. It's cheeky, and yet charming. It's so wonderfully mundane. Here is a man, clearly infatuated, dreaming not of conquest or perfection, but of doing her laundry, of standing close enough to see the sun glint off her wet skin. Another one nearby reads, I passed by her house. Though I had no business there, my heart led me. My feet followed. You don't need translation for that one. You've known that feeling. We all have. The scribe offers you a seat. He tells you how these poems were often recited aloud, at feasts, in courtyards, between friends, sometimes even between strangers, testing the waters of a new affection. The rhythms are gentle, made to be whispered, shared in the dark, memorized and treasured like charms. In one corner of the workshop, a young woman is practicing her calligraphy. You glance at her papyrus and recognize a phrase, one of the most famous. With her love, I am alive. Without it, I am a reed in the desert. You don't need to ask if she's thinking of someone specific. The slight blush on her cheek tells you everything. These weren't just exercises in literary skill. These poems were emotional offerings, ways to express what couldn't always be said directly, especially in a culture that valued restraint, where direct confessions weren't always appropriate. A poem could do what a conversation couldn't. You learn that lovers exchange these poems like we pass notes or text messages, inscribed on scraps of papyrus or painted on pottery shards. They were tucked into sandals, hidden in baskets of fruit, or recited during twilight walks by the river. One of the most beautiful ones reads, I belong to you like bread belongs to the oven, like water to the jar. Historians still argue whether these poems were purely fictional or autobiographical, whether they were composed by professional scribes or inspired by real, lived experience. But as you listen to them being recited aloud, you realize it doesn't really matter. What matters is that they sound like real people. People who blushed, who pined, who waited, who worried. And not all the poems were tender. Some were filled with longing, frustration, even jealousy. One laments, she passed me in the street. She did not look. Was I stone? Was I nothing? You read it again and feel the ache beneath the words, the kind of silence that screams, the kind of moment that echoes in the chest long after it's passed. There's one that feels almost too modern. You said you would come last night. I waited. I prepared figs. I lit incense. But only the cat came. The scribe chuckles as you read it. Some things never change, he says. You're shown a papyrus fragment from a woman's voice, clear, assertive, and impossible to ignore. My desire for you overwhelms me like the Nile in flood. It's bold, direct, and entirely unapologetic. You can almost hear her voice in the words, fierce and unblinking. In this culture, love wasn't one size fits all. It could be shy or saucy, devotional or demanding. The poems held space for all of it. For women to be flirtatious, for men to be vulnerable, for everyone to feel. In one quiet corner of the shop, there's a clay jar filled with tightly rolled scraps of papyrus, poems too worn to be recopied, but too beloved to throw away. They're faded, torn, ink smeared with time and sweat. But they still speak. They always will. You step outside again, scroll in hand, and notice a young couple seated beside a well. She leans her head on his shoulder. He traces hieroglyphs into the dust with a stick. Your name, her name, a little reed between them. You can't help but smile. Someday, maybe their children will read these poems aloud. Maybe they'll laugh. Maybe they'll cry. Maybe they'll see themselves in the aching lines. Because love, whether sung beside a river or scribbled in haste, always finds a way to survive. You tuck the scroll into your belt and begin walking again, the words still ringing in your ears. I will meet you where the lilies bloom. I will meet you when your heart calls mine. And though you're surrounded by ruins, stone, and silence, your heart feels full of voices, of longing, of connection, of poems written not to be famous, but simply to be felt. You carry the scroll through the brightening streets of Thebes, its words still whispering beneath your breath. But now the city is fully awake, bustling with vendors setting out fish and onions, children chasing after errant goats, and women filling water jars at the corners of courtyards. The light is gentle, but golden, and with it comes a new mood. Desire hasn't faded with the sunrise. It's simply taken on a new form, a subtler rhythm, woven into the morning routine. You begin to notice things you didn't last night. The way coal lines a woman's eyes just so. The dab of myrrh behind a man's ear. The flash of a faience bead tucked in a braid. Here, beauty is not vanity, it's magic. You slip into a perfumer's stall, drawn by the scent of crushed herbs and resin. Shelves are crowded with little alabaster jars, bronze tweezers, stone grinders, and vials stoppered with wax. The woman behind the table gives you a sly smile and tilts her head toward a tray of small blue pots. Lotus oil, she says, for love. Then she nods toward another. Frankincense and cinnamon, warmer, for after. She doesn't explain further. She doesn't have to. You lift one of the pots and open it. The scent is dizzying, sweet, earthy, just a little sharp. You're told women would rub it behind their knees, on the soles of their feet, and even into their wigs. The body became a spell in motion, every step charged with intention. And it wasn't just scent. Egyptians were masters of adornment. You pass a young girl having her eyebrows painted with ground malachite. Her mother applies it with a reed stick, humming softly. The girl fidgets, but not from impatience, from excitement. Tonight, she'll be allowed to dance with the other girls in the courtyard, and she wants to look her best. You remember being that age, wanting to be seen, hoping to be noticed. A little further on, a man adjusts a broad collar around his neck, a cascade of colored stones and beads, each with its own meaning, not just decoration, symbols of fertility, health, desire, the ankh for life, the frog for growth, the sycamore leaf for female energy. A potter calls you over and offers a carved ivory wand, its handle shaped like a naked woman dancing with lions. To keep bad spirits away from the bed, he says casually, as though it's no stranger than sweeping a floor. Protection, beauty, desire, they're all intertwined here. You duck into a small house, cool, shaded, and fragrant with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. The woman inside is a healer, or maybe a midwife, or maybe both. It's hard to separate roles here. She places a small bowl before you and begins to grind something with a stone. What is it? You ask. She answers without looking up. mandrake root, rose petals, and a pinch of powdered copper. For passion, you drink it before sleep. She pauses. Only a little, too much, and you'll end up talking to the walls. You laugh quietly. She doesn't. She taps the bowl. Some use crocodile fat, but that's for stronger cases. You decide not to ask what that means. She shows you more, a bundle of pomegranate peel to steep in wine, a satchel of carob seeds to place beneath the bed, an amulet to wear between the breasts. Each item is tied to love, or protection, or persuasion. It's not about manipulation, she explains. It's about readiness, alignment, making sure the body and spirit are both open to the same thing. You lean in as she shows you an old spell written in red ink on linen. The lines are rhythmic, almost poetic. She reads it aloud. As the moon pulls the tide, let my desire pull theirs. As papyrus drinks the Nile, let my heart draw theirs near. She folds the linen carefully and tucks it away. That one, she says, you burn at midnight, but only after bathing in lotus water. You realize then just how ritualistic these acts were, not superstition, but embodied belief. Whether it worked or not didn't always matter. What mattered was the intention, the care, the sense that love and beauty were things you could participate in, not just hope for. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widely believed to work, or if they were more symbolic gestures, a kind of spiritual theater. But when you see how tenderly the woman handles each ingredient, how seriously she recites each line, you understand that belief wasn't always the point. The ritual was the experience. Outside, you see a man washing his hands in a basin scented with mint. He's preparing to visit someone, judging by how often he checks his reflection in the polished bronze mirror. He ties a red ribbon around his wrist, a charm, they say, to keep your heart protected while still letting love in. At the market, you pass two older women gossiping beside baskets of onions. One of them pulls out a charm made of braided hair and fig bark. She gave him this last week, she whispers. Now he can't look at anyone else. They burst into laughter. You're not sure if they believe it, but that hardly seems to matter. The charm is part of the story now. A symbol, a secret, a signal. Further along, you find a young couple crouched beside a tree, hands buried in each other's hair, not speaking. He wears a small ring of copper. She's marked her eyes with thick black coal, like two stars drawn to orbit. Their foreheads press together, and they stay like that for a long time. You wonder if she wore the lotus oil, if he drank the mandrake wine, if either of them needed anything at all besides this moment, this closeness, this silent hum between them that doesn't ask for words. You keep walking, passing more houses, more doorways framed with blue-painted lintels to ward off evil, more corners where bundles of garlic hang for protection or attraction, or both. And all the while, you begin to realize, for the ancient Egyptians, love was not passive. It wasn't something you stumbled into by accident. It was cultivated, nourished, invited in like a guest, with painted eyes, with perfumed skin, with herbs, oils, and tiny whispered spells, not to deceive, not to manipulate, but to make yourself ready, to say, without speaking, I am open, I am here, I am whole. The Nile glints in the distance, reflecting the early morning light. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of the city. Rose oil, cinnamon, sandalwood, smoke, and feel, for a moment, just a little enchanted. The morning heat rises as the sun climbs above Thebes, casting long, sharp shadows against mud brick walls and painted porticos. You find yourself drifting from the open courtyards of beauty and ritual, winding instead through alleys shaded by reed mats and hanging linens. The city awakens differently in each corner. And here, beneath the woven awnings where women sit grinding grain, kneading dough, or bathing children, life is pragmatic, intimate, yes, but unadorned. This, you quickly realize, is where desire meets consequence. A young mother cradles a sleepy toddler on her hip while stirring lentils with her free hand. Another woman nearby bounces a baby with one arm while laughing at a neighbor's teasing. Their movements are practiced, fluid. Behind their tired smiles, there's warmth, but also weight. Children are joy, but they are also work. And in a time when disease, hunger, and fate could snatch life away without warning, every pregnancy was a gamble. So it makes perfect sense that the ancient Egyptians had what you might call a birth control cabinet, though that phrase would have made them blink. For them, fertility was sacred, yes, but so was choice. And when the time wasn't right, they had options. Many of them. Surprisingly advanced. You step into a small home where an older woman, a midwife by trade, or perhaps something closer to a healer, has lined her shelves with little ceramic jars and bundles wrapped in linen. She doesn't ask why you've come. She's used to visitors seeking privacy. She opens a pot and offers it to you. The smell is earthy, pungent, not unpleasant. "Crocodile dung," she says simply. You nearly cough. She laughs softly. Dried, then mixed with honey and sometimes natron, shaped into a cone, inserted before contact. You blink, trying to process the idea. She shrugs. It worked, sometimes. You're told that the Egyptians believed the dung created a hostile environment inside the womb. Modern historians and scientists have debated the efficacy, with mixed opinions. Historians still argue whether these methods were truly effective or symbolic deterrents. But either way, they were used deliberately, widely, and with care. Next, she unwraps a bundle of linen strips soaked in acacia resin. These, she explains, were inserted like tampons. Acacia, she says, produces lactic acid, a natural spermicide. You raise your eyebrows. She nods knowingly. It stings a little, but better than another mouth to feed when harvests are low. You glance around the room, taking in the jars labeled with ochre ink. Pomegranate root, honey and goose fat mixture, mashed dates with carob and beer foam. Each one has its place, each one used for spacing children, avoiding pregnancy, or regulating cycles. In one jar, you spot something different, tiny pebbles. Those, the woman says, are for prayers. She smiles. Not everything works with medicine. Some things need patience, or hope. You notice that she keeps the jars away from the main part of the home, tucked into a corner, like a secret. Not because it's shameful, but because it's powerful. Knowledge like this wasn't given lightly. It was taught carefully, passed between women in hushed tones and sideways glances. Not hidden, but protected. Across town. A young woman sits cross-legged beside a basin, steeping rue leaves in warm water. She adds coriander and mint, stirs the mixture with a wooden spoon, and then drinks it slowly, grimacing at the bitterness. She rubs her stomach and closes her eyes. Another blend. Another method. You learn that certain herbs were taken post-intercourse, believed to prevent implantation. Others were consumed regularly as preventative measures. Some were boiled. Others chewed raw. The knowledge was not codified in stone tablets, but whispered across generations, memorized by daughters, taught by aunties, guarded by midwives. You visit a small temple where scribes have preserved fragments of the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts. Among its many prescriptions, there are sections devoted to fertility, how to encourage it, how to suppress it, how to identify dangerous days. One recipe calls for mixing ground acacia, dates, and honey into a paste. Another suggests placing fermented cotton soaked in sour milk within the body. None of these sound pleasant, but the intent is clear. Agency mattered, even in a society that celebrated fertility, that elevated motherhood as divine. There was still space, quiet, firm space, for women to choose when and whether to become mothers. You find that remarkable and quietly radical. Outside, you pass a gathering of women, young, old, somewhere in between. They're shelling beans, but the conversation drifts. One talks about how she hasn't bled in 3 moons and how her back aches. Another raises her eyebrows. A third says, without turning her head, "Drink fenugreek and lie on your left side. If it doesn't come by sunrise, see the temple nurse." They keep working, no judgment, just information. Even when pregnancy occurred, Egyptian women had various ways to test and confirm. One common method involved urinating on barley and wheat seeds, then observing which sprouted. If barley grew, they said, the child would be male. If wheat, female. If neither, perhaps no child at all. Modern science has found surprising support for this test's accuracy in detecting pregnancy based on hormonal changes. You walk past a linen merchant's stall, and he offers you a swatch dyed bright red. "For new mothers," he says, "or those hoping to avoid it." When you raise an eyebrow, he chuckles. "Red wards off chance. At least, that's what my sister says." So even the colors they wore were laced with intention. By midday, the sun is high and the air shimmers with heat. You take shelter beneath a sycamore fig tree and sip cool water from a clay jar. Around you, the sounds of the city carry on. Life, in all its messy, beautiful fullness. Babies cry, lovers argue. Someone laughs far too loudly in the next courtyard. And yet, you can't stop thinking about those tiny clay jars. The ones filled with ground seeds, dried dung, crushed bark, and hope. They weren't crude superstitions. They were tools, instruments of control in a world where control was rare. A way for women, especially women, to shape their own futures. You close your eyes, the tree's leaves rustling softly above you, maybe somewhere nearby. Another woman is dipping her fingers into a pot of honey and acacia. Maybe another is grinding rue beneath her heel, whispering a prayer for just a little more time. Maybe the birth control cabinet was never really about prevention. Maybe it was about intention, about awareness, about saying to the universe, quietly but clearly, not now. Maybe later, only if I choose. You rise from beneath the sycamore fig, brushing dust from your tunic, still thinking about that quiet phrase, only if I choose. The midday sun is hot now, painting the walls in bands of gold and shadow. The Nile glints in the distance, and you turn toward it, drawn not just by the promise of cool air, but by a curiosity that's been quietly building. You've heard many stories of love, between men and women, between gods and mortals, between queen and consort. But you begin to wonder, were there other kinds of love here too? the kind that didn't fit neatly into carved stelae or polite household poems, the kind whispered between two men sharing wine in a dark courtyard, or two women leaning a little too close as they ground spices, their fingers brushing over the bowl. The answer, it turns out, may be waiting across the river. You take a boat to the West Bank, where tombs line the cliffs like quiet promises. Here, the dead rest beneath paintings of what they hoped would continue after this life: feasts, music, lovers, laughter. The Egyptians didn't believe in an end. They believed in continuity, and in those painted chambers, the truth sometimes lingers more boldly than it could above ground. You enter a tomb that looks ordinary from the outside, modest, quiet, but inside, your breath catches. Two men are seated side by side, their arms gently around each other. In another panel, they embrace. Their names are painted clearly in hieroglyphs: Khnum-hotep and Nyankhnum. Both were royal manicurists, high-status servants in the court of Pharaoh Nusere during the 5th dynasty. And both were buried together, sharing titles usually reserved for married couples: beloved of the king, overseer of the palace. At first, some archaeologists assume they were brothers, but their depictions are strikingly intimate, their faces touching, their bodies drawn in mirrored positions, like husband and wife, pairs in neighboring tombs. The images show not just affection, but romantic parody, and no wives are mentioned. Historians still argue whether they were romantic partners, life companions, or something else entirely. But here, in this silent chamber carved from rock and time, you feel no ambiguity. There is love on these walls, unhidden, undiminished, proud. You sit quietly in the shade of their eternal home, feeling the cool stone at your back. You imagine them, laughing over oils, teasing one another during royal appointments, planning this very tomb, choosing every line, every gesture, wanting to be remembered as a pair. And they were. Back outside, the wind has shifted. You walk uphill, past workers restoring a crumbled site, and come upon another mural, this time, two women seated beneath a date palm. One holds a sistrum, the other reaches to pluck a fruit. Their eyes are locked, their bodies angled toward each other. No names remain here, no story carved to survive. But the tenderness is unmistakable. You speak to a scholar cataloging fragments nearby, and she tells you of love songs attributed to women, preserved in the same tone and rhythm as those from men. She shows you one on a chipped pot shard. I see her across the courtyard. My heart flutters like the reed tips. I long to braid her hair with my hands. There's no context, no names, but again, no censorship either, just expression. You begin to understand that in ancient Egypt, gender did not strictly police affection. Male-male affection appears in myths, in letters, in artwork. Female-female intimacy is hinted at in poetry, in domestic graffiti, and sometimes in silence, a silence that still suggests space. Love, in all its forms, was not always labeled, but it was lived. You find another fragment, faint and cracked, depicting a god touching another male figure on the shoulder, offering him an ankh, the symbol of life. The gods themselves, after all, were often fluid. Some male gods bore children. Some goddesses took on masculine forms. Some existed in dualities, like Hapi, god of the Nile, often depicted with both masculine muscles and a nurturing, rounded belly. The myth of creation itself tells of Adam, the first god. who created the world through an act of self-love. No partner, no binary, just existence birthing existence. It's here, among these stories and fragments, that you begin to piece together a culture that, while structured in many ways, held space for nuance. They didn't define everything into rigid categories. They didn't always explain what didn't need explaining. Sometimes things just were: two men, one tomb, two women, one look, one heart, many kinds of love. You meet a stoneworker as you descend the cliff path. He offers you a cool drink and asks what you've seen. You tell him, Khnum Hotep and Khnum, the two men buried as one. He nods. They were lucky, he says, to find someone like that, to be remembered for it. You wonder aloud if others lived similar lives, but left no tombs, no paintings. He shrugs. Maybe. But even if no one carved it in stone, the heart remembers. You sit beside him as the sun begins its descent behind the cliffs. The wind smells of dust and time. And you think about all the stories that never made it into the history scrolls. The ones passed only through looks, through shared bread, through fingers brushing in the dark. Because love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's carved in walls. Sometimes it's simply lived, and that's enough. And in ancient Egypt, even if not loudly, even if not everywhere, queer lives were present, in poems, in myths, in tombs built for two. You stand slowly, stretch, and take one last look back at the painted figures holding each other in eternal embrace. They stare ahead, serene, as if to say, we were here, and you believe them. You leave the West Bank slowly, the boat rocking gently as it carries you back across the Nile. The wind is warm now, carrying the dusty scent of the cliffs and the faraway sweetness of flowering date palms. The city ahead shimmers slightly in the afternoon haze, but the mood is more grounded than the tombs you just left behind. Life, after all, doesn't stop for reflection. It churns along in fields and workshops and scribes' benches. And so do hearts. Back on the East Bank, you drift into a neighborhood of laborers and craftsmen. The homes here are built close together, sun-baked mud brick, reed mats for shade, clothes drying on ropes. You follow the scent of fresh bread and crushed coriander to a series of storage buildings and workspaces, granaries, bakeries, breweries, and carpentry sheds. In the distance, a group of men are unloading jars from a cart. Their sleeves are rolled up, and their laughter carries easily through the courtyard. One of them tosses a loaf to a younger man, who misses it entirely but grins anyway. You notice the way their eyes linger, the way they bump shoulders without needing a reason. It's subtle, but unmistakable. Something soft, blooming under the sun. You follow the trail to a large communal bakery, where women roll dough and shape loaves, their arms dusted in flour. There's a rhythm to it. Stretch, fold, pat, pass. Every so often, one of them glances toward the granary door, waiting. You wait with her. Eventually, a young grain counter walks by. He doesn't stop, just nods slightly. She watches him disappear, then smiles to herself and returns to her work with just a little more energy. Another woman catches her grinning and smirks. Again, she teases. You've stumbled into something familiar. Workplace romance. The oldest kind, for all the rituals. Papyrus love poems. And goddess blessings. Sometimes love just shows up, while measuring barley, or mending baskets, or waiting in line to sharpen your sickle. You sit on the edge of a low wall, watching the day unfold. In the carpentry yard, two men argue good-naturedly over a measurement. A moment later, one grabs the other's wrist, not with aggression, but with fond exasperation. Their laughter is low, like a shared joke only they understand. A bystander rolls his eyes. "Get a room," he mutters, though he's smiling. It's not dramatic. It's not legendary. It's just human. A little later, you find yourself inside a weaving workshop, where women pass dyed thread through looms. One of them is humming softly, something between a tune and a secret. You ask about the song, and she grins. "It's for someone I see at the fish market," she says. "He always gives me the plumpest perch." She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't need to. Sometimes love isn't declarations or offerings. It's fish, or a longer conversation at the water jar, or an extra turn stirring the beer pot. And beer, as you soon discover, plays a role too. At the back of a low building near the fields, a team of brewers are straining mash into clay jars. The smell is yeasty, earthy, familiar. One woman ladles foam off the top, pauses, and raises her eyebrows at someone standing behind her. You turn to look. It's a man holding two woven reed cups. She fills them both, hands him one, and their fingers linger just a second too long. They drink side by side, saying nothing. The silence isn't awkward, it's companionable. Later, while helping to tie up bundles of barley, you hear one of the older workers muttering about how the granary walls have seen more proposals than the Temple of Hathor. You ask what he means, and he chuckles. People meet here every day, and not just for work. He lifts a heavy sack onto a cart. "I met my wife stacking bricks 24 years ago. She stole my lunch. I married her anyway." His grin deepens the lines on his face, but you can still see the younger man behind them. The memory still makes him soft. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians had strict rules about workplace relationships, especially in temples or royal households. But among the workers, farmers, and artisans, such matters weren't written in law. They were simply lived. And when boundaries were crossed, they were often navigated with tact, not punishment. Sometimes, if a romance became disruptive, one person might be moved to another workshop. But more often, it was simply understood that where people work, people connect. It's a fact of life, and likely always has been. You walk through a vineyard now, following workers trimming vines. It's quieter here, and the afternoon sun presses heavy on your shoulders. In the shade of a fig tree, you find a man and woman sitting close, sharing a bowl of dates. She plucks one, presses it gently to his lips. He doesn't move. She laughs and eats it herself. They don't look up as you pass. You're not part of their moment, but you understand it. In another corner of the vineyard, someone has etched a tiny carving into a tree trunk, two names, side by side, joined by a looping vine. You run your fingers over the marks. They're recent, fresh. Someone wanted to make it real. The Egyptians may not have had office parties or romantic comedies, but they had harvests, night shifts, and quiet glances shared over kiln fires. They had long afternoons, aching backs, calloused hands, and hearts that still fluttered when someone walked past at the right moment. You realize, with quiet certainty, that love in the workplace wasn't an exception. It was part of the rhythm, as natural as grain, as steady as the Nile. It wasn't just where bread was baked and taxes were counted. It was where poems were memorized, nicknames invented, eyes met across baskets of lentils. where hearts, tired but hopeful, found each other over and over again. And maybe, tonight, when the shifts are done and the stars come out, someone will slip a lotus petal beneath a woven mat, or leave a palm date at someone's door, or write, in quick chalk strokes, a name beside their own, just once, just to see how it looks. You turn back toward the heart of the city as the sun begins to tilt westward, casting long shadows behind the storage buildings and granaries. Somewhere nearby, laughter rises again, familiar, warm, and tinged with something more. And you know, not every love is sacred, not every love is epic. Some just begin with barley dust and borrowed time. And those, perhaps, are the most lasting of all. The sun sinks lower now, casting a molten glow across the streets of Thebes. You feel the shift in pace, the bustling energy of midday settling into something slower, quieter, more contemplative. Workers head home, dust rising gently beneath their sandals. Courtyards fill with clinking pottery, the thrum of evening chores, and the sound of someone beginning to hum an old song. You follow that hum to a small street where older women gather just beyond the reach of the market noise. They sit together beneath a stretched linen canopy, weaving palm fronds, shelling nuts, and sharing stories. One of them wears a faded linen shawl and a copper amulet in the shape of a cat. She speaks slowly, but with clarity. He died during the season of the flood, she says, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The house was too quiet after that, so I sold it. The others nod, not in sympathy, but in recognition. In this city of temples and taxes, grief is a language everyone speaks eventually. You sit among them as they pass around pomegranate seeds and candied carob, and you begin to realize that in ancient Egypt, widowhood wasn't the end of a woman's story. It was the start of a new chapter, sometimes harder, yes, but not hopeless. Unlike many ancient societies, Egyptian women had remarkable legal autonomy, even after their husbands died. A widow could inherit property, manage her own finances, and, if she chose, remarry without anyone's permission. There was no expectation that she remain bound to her late husband's name forever, and in some cases, she didn't want to. One woman laughs as she tells how she threw her first husband's sandals into the Nile. He never liked fish anyway. She shrugs. She remarried 3 years later to a man who brought her figs from the market every week without fail. That was worth more than gold, she adds. Across from her, another woman confesses she never remarried. I liked the quiet, she says simply, and I had my garden. You learn that there were no strict social pressures to remarry. Some women did, some didn't. Each path was valid. Some found comfort in solitude. Others discovered companionship later in life. A few even returned to their parents' homes, not out of failure, but out of choice. You visit a small home near the wall of the city where a woman, likely in her 40s, lives alone with her daughter. She invites you in, pours you sweet beer, and talks openly about her divorce. It happened 5 years ago, when her husband took up with another woman and began leaving their grain offerings unpaid. He loved the idea of me, she says, but not the real me. She didn't scream, she didn't curse. She walked to the scribal court with her father and filed for dissolution. The scribe recorded the split on papyrus, dividing property and confirming she retained her dowry. She got the donkey, he got the tools. She never looked back. You marvel at the simplicity of it. There's no drama, no scandal, just resolution. Historians still argue whether divorce was common across all classes, or more frequent among artisans and urban dwellers who had easier access to scribes and legal channels. But surviving documents, contracts, petitions, and household records tell us clearly divorce was accepted, and it wasn't always bitter. Some couples even continued to co-parent, sharing expenses and living close by. Later, you sit with a young man who was raised by his divorced mother and grandmother. He points to a small wooden box beside the bed, carved with images of Hathor. "That was my father's gift to her, before they separated," he says. "She kept it, not because she misses him, but because it reminds her that even broken things once mattered." There's no bitterness in his voice, just understanding. You walk through the neighborhood as evening prayers begin. Incense curls from altars. Soft chanting rises into the breeze. You find a scribe's booth at the edge of the square, where a new couple signs their marriage declaration. It's their second marriage. Both were previously widowed. They stand side by side, not young, but glowing. Their eyes meet often, and they smile like old friends reunited. The scribe reads their vows aloud. There is no grand ceremony, no temple choir, just the words, the ink, and the promise to share the days they still have left. You're told that second marriages were not considered lesser in Egypt. There was no cultural obsession with firsts. What mattered was harmony, a partnership that brought peace to the home. Even the gods, after all, had complicated relationships. Osiris died and was brought back. Hathor had moments of rage, of softness, of renewal. Life wasn't static. Love wasn't either. As the light fades, you sit near a small garden enclosed by mud brick walls. A middle-aged woman waters her herbs, basil, mint, fennel. You ask if she lives alone. She smiles. Now, yes, but I wasn't always alone. She tells you of a man she loved when she was just a teenager. They married young, too young, she says. When the arguments grew louder than the laughter, they parted. I thought I'd be alone forever, she admits, pressing her thumb into the damp soil. But then I met someone, at the grain market of all places. We shared a basket of apricots. She laughs, the memory warm. He was kind. He was patient. They never married. He had obligations elsewhere, but they shared many quiet evenings, many slow mornings. He passed 2 years ago. I didn't need a contract to know what we had, she says softly. You nod, watching her tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You realize something quietly powerful in that moment. Love didn't always come with a title here. Sometimes it was loud, sometimes legal, sometimes it was simply shared meals, warm glances, and someone to tell your stories to at the end of the day. You rise to leave as the sky deepens into cobalt. The first stars blink overhead, and you think about all the women of Thebes who said goodbye, who walked away, who started over. Some remarried, some didn't. Some buried the past, others carried it in small wooden boxes. But all of them lived, fully, fiercely, on their own terms. And if love came again, they welcomed it not as something owed, but as something earned. The stars spread wider above you now, cool and sharp against the velvety Egyptian night. You've wandered beyond the courtyard gardens and shadowed doorways, into a quieter part of the city, where the light from open windows flickers like embers on the breeze. You think back on the widow's story, the way she smiled at the past without letting it define her. And you begin to wonder, what happened when love went wrong? Not softly wrong, Not "I need time" wrong, but truly, scandalously wrong. Because even in a place where marriage could end cleanly, where lovers met at the bakery and new beginnings were common, human hearts are still messy. There were lies, betrayals, affairs that bloomed in secret and then burst, leaving ashes and questions behind. And ancient Egypt, for all its incense and poetry, had rules for those things too. You pass through a narrow archway and into a dim chamber where a scribe is finishing up the day's ledger. He sees you and gestures toward a bench. You sit, and he unrolls a piece of papyrus, not for temple inventories or weed accounts, but something far more dramatic, a legal complaint. It's dated from the 20th dynasty. In it, a husband accuses another man of enticing his wife with promises of fish and perfume. He claims the man visited her while he worked in the fields, and that neighbors saw her lifting her veil in his presence, an act considered intimate, reserved for lovers or close family. The punishment, not execution, not even imprisonment, just restitution, a payment in beer and linen, a public acknowledgement, and perhaps a little embarrassment. The scribe chuckles. The fish always gives them away, he says, shaking his head. You flip through more cases. A wife accused of consorting with a temple singer. A man caught exchanging secret messages with a merchant's daughter. A widow who took a younger lover and gave him property from her late husband's estate. The tone of these records is surprisingly practical. There is no fire and brimstone, no moral panic, just documentation, evidence, agreements, a desire not to punish, but to restore balance. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians saw infidelity as a moral failing or simply a disruption to social harmony. What's clear is that while love was personal, it was also public, tied to property, to inheritance, to one's place in the community. You leave the scribe's home and follow a trail of music toward a small tavern near the edge of the artisan's district. The room is filled with warm light and laughter. Cups clink. A woman sings a teasing tune about a girl who married a baker and ran off with a potter. The crowd roars. It's humor, but it's also truth. Scandals didn't always end in court. Sometimes they became songs, tales, warnings whispered to children or twisted into jokes shared over beer, a way for the community to process betrayal with a bit of levity and a bit of sting. You sit at a table beside an older couple. The woman, draped in a mustard yellow shawl, catches your glance and leans over. "He cheated once," she says, tapping her partner's knee with a smirk. 30 years ago, with a dancer from Karnak. The man groans. "It wasn't cheating. We weren't even married yet." She grins. "But you were promised." He sighs, takes a sip of beer, and says, "She still tells the story at every festival." They clink cups. There's no bitterness left, only rhythm. The scandal has aged into folklore. You hear another tale of a priest who fell for the wife of a grain inspector. They ran off to Nubia for 6 weeks before being caught and dragged back to Thebes, barefoot and broke. The priest lost his post. The woman lost her dowry. But later, records show they were buried side by side in a tomb outside the city, paid for with coin earned from weaving. Maybe love sometimes won, despite the rules. And the rules themselves, surprisingly flexible. Adultery wasn't always punished by law unless it caused measurable harm, loss of property, disruption of lineage, or public disgrace. If a husband brought charges, he had to prove them. And in some cases, wives filed complaints against their unfaithful spouses, demanding return of property or official separation. You hear about a rare case from the New Kingdom where a wife left her husband for another woman. The record doesn't call it love. It calls it disorder in the household. But the outcome? She left with her share of property, and no further action was taken. A scribal note adds, "No harm came to the children." You sit with that for a while, because it tells you something important, that even when love bent or broke the expected lines, people adapted, they revised contracts, they moved to new homes, they mourned the rupture and started again. Not always easily, not always kindly, but they kept going. You step outside as the tavern begins to empty. Across the street, a woman stands at her doorway holding a clay jar of oil. A man approaches, hesitates, then turns away. She watches him go. Her jaw tightens. She does not call after him. Sometimes love ends not with a bang, but with a breath. You walk further into the night, past homes where lamps have gone out and silence curls in the corners. A painted doorway catches your eye. You step closer and see a faded inscription above it. To love well is to choose again each day. You wonder who lived there, what promises were made, broken, mended, who lifted a veil too soon or too late, who forgave, who didn't. And you realize, even in a city of rituals and rules, love refused to be tamed. It followed its own path. It broke things. It healed them. It turned into laughter in taverns, and ink on papyrus, and lines scratched into door frames. And when it failed, it taught people something. About themselves, about others, about starting again. The stars above blink quietly, bearing witness. And you keep walking, knowing that even the oldest cities had hearts that beat a little too fast sometimes, that even the wisest people made foolish promises under moonlight, and that maybe, just maybe, that is what makes love real. The streets of Thebes have grown quiet now, with only the occasional shuffle of a passing donkey or the echo of distant footsteps in the dark. Most windows are shuttered, courtyards swept, and lamps extinguished. You walk slowly beneath a silvered sky, following the soft rustle of wind through palm fronds, the whisper of sand curling along the stone walls. It's night, fully and truly now, and in ancient Egypt, night belonged to stories, not just the love poems and sighs of sleeping couples, but the deeper tales, the strange ones, the ones whispered in low voices over the last embers of a household fire. You're drawn into one such home now, where a group of children are curled on mats beside an old man who's weaving one of these stories into the air like smoke. He leans forward, voice gravelly but firm. They say if you kiss someone under a full moon without asking Hathor's blessing, he begins, your heart will forget its name before sunrise. The children gasp softly. Beside them, their mother chuckles and shakes her head. Don't listen. That's just a tale from Auntie Menna. She was always dramatic. But the old man raises an eyebrow. Was it her, or was it the girl who kissed the temple baker and woke up the next day speaking only riddles? A hush settles again. You sit beside the woven mat and listen, enchanted. The Egyptians didn't separate love from the mystical. Intimacy was a threshold, not just of bodies, but of spirits. And where thresholds exist, so do guardians, risks, and rules. You learn of the night demons, malevolent spirits who crept into homes when passion was misaligned, or when lovers invited one another across sacred boundaries without first honoring the gods. These beings weren't monsters. They were whispers, shivers, The unexplained heaviness in the air after a quarrel, the sudden silence between two people who once spoke easily. One tale tells of a man who fell in love with a priestess. She returned his affection, but their union was forbidden by her temple vows. Still, they met in secret, night after night, until she fell ill. Her dreams became haunted by visions of a crocodile with a woman's voice. She died within a week. No one dared remove her anklets, which they said still pulsed with heat. Long after her passing, the children huddle closer. Even the mother stops folding linens. It's easy to think of such stories as warnings, but you begin to understand they were also explanations. For heartbreak, for illness, for the sudden change in a lover's gaze. When reason failed, myth stepped in, and those myths held meaning. You learn about love curses, too. Not always dark, but potent. A woman might tie a strand of hair around a clay figurine and whisper a desire into its ear, then bury it beside the hearth for 7 nights. If the love was true, the man would dream of her. If it wasn't, his sleep would turn restless, his appetite sour. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread belief or private rituals, performed by the desperate, the hopeful, or the wronged. But the spells survive, etched onto pottery shards and buried beneath doorways. The fear, the longing, the desperation to control the uncontrollable. It's all there, outside the home. You walk past a narrow alley where someone has painted a protective eye on the wall in ochre. Not a symbol of violence, but of watchfulness. In the context of love, it was used to guard against envy, deceit, or spirits who might slip between lovers in the night. You pass a house with blue-painted lintels and a bunch of garlic tied above the threshold. You've seen this before, used to ward off the achy spirits of the restless dead. According to belief, those who died unfulfilled in love could roam the earth, seeking stolen kisses, whispered confessions, or hearts that still ached with unfinished desire. You pause beside a sleeping dog curled near a doorway and think of those myths not as superstitions, but as emotional truths wrapped in metaphor. The fear of being forgotten, the worry that a bond could fade too quickly, the ache of loving someone who no longer looks at you the same way. These myths were ways to say the unsayable. You find yourself drawn to a small shrine on the outskirts of the district. It's not grand, just a mud brick niche with a carved figure of Bes, the squat, lion-faced god of protection and laughter. Though comical in appearance, Bes was no joke. He guarded bedrooms, mothers, lovers. His face, often painted on bedposts, was meant to scare off intruders, seen and unseen. You kneel before the statue and notice a faint engraving in the brick. Guard this bed from words not meant. You don't need a priest to explain it. Words are power, and in intimacy. The wrong ones, said too soon or not at all, can haunt. Bes wasn't the only one who presided over the night. Taweret, with the body of a hippo and the limbs of a lioness, also protected sleeping chambers. She shielded pregnant women, lovers, and infants from nocturnal harm. Her presence meant rest. Her absence meant worry. And so, the ancients didn't just light lamps for warmth. They lit them to keep watch against spirits, against loneliness, against the creeping doubts that sometimes followed even the warmest embrace. Back in the city center, a musician plays a slow tune on a reed flute. The sound drifts like a lullaby over the rooftops. A couple walks quietly beneath it, their shadows long and soft against the wall. The man carries a jar, The woman carries nothing, but her fingers brush his as they walk. You think of the old man's story, the one about the moon stealing names. It sounds far-fetched in daylight, but now, in the hush of night, it feels like it might just be true. And even if it isn't, it still matters. Because every culture needs its myths, its night fears, its cautionary tales dressed in fig leaves of moonlight. And love, especially love, is a fragile thing. Sometimes it thrives, sometimes it fades, and sometimes it breaks without explanation. So, we blame the stars, or the curse, or the ghost of a lover who was never really ours. Not because it's true in the way stones are true, but because it's true in the way hearts are true, quietly, fiercely, irrationally. You turn back toward the river now, the myths curling around your thoughts like mist. And you understand that even in a world of scrolls and rituals, love was still a mystery. And no matter how many poems were written, no matter how many contracts signed, sometimes, all people had were stories to keep the dark at bay. You wander back through Thebes in the quietest hours of the night, when the city seems to hold its breath. The revelry has faded. Even the musicians have put their instruments aside. The oil lamps flicker in doorways like sleepy eyes, and the Nile hums softly in the background, steady and constant as a heartbeat. The scent of wood smoke, crushed herbs, and old stories still lingers in the air. Your path leads you again toward the West Bank, toward the resting place of the dead. But tonight, your journey isn't about mourning, it's about curiosity. Because for all the public decorum and poetic restraint of Egyptian love, there was also another side to it, a more explicit side. One whispered behind hands, scratched into pottery, or even, when no one expected it, painted directly onto tomb walls. Erotica, not just in secret papyri or myths cloaked in metaphor, but in art that looked directly at desire without apology. You enter a tomb rarely visited, tucked into the limestone cliffs beyond the grander monuments. The air is cooler here, the silence thick. A torch lights your way as you step into a low chamber. At first, you see the expected scenes, harvests, offerings, the deceased seated in regal calm beside their favored gods. But then you turn a corner, and suddenly, the tone shifts. On the far wall, delicately rendered in faded ochre and deep red, a couple reclines on a low couch. They are not symbolic, they are naked, limbs intertwined, hair loose and free. The man's hand rests lightly on the woman's hip. Her eyes are half-lidded, her mouth open, not in conversation, but in something more primal. A servant stands nearby, not shocked, but simply holding a jar of scented oil. There is no caption, no explanation, just the image, bold, fluid, intimate. This isn't a warning, it isn't a joke, it's just life immortalized. Beside it, another painting shows a group of dancers in sheer linen gowns, their hips mid-sway, bodies curved with intention. One is laughing, head thrown back. As a musician plays a slow rhythm on a hand drum, you can almost hear the beat, feel it. Even, the artist has captured something beyond technique. He's captured chemistry. You learn that in some tombs, especially those of artists, musicians, and scribes. Scenes like these were not uncommon. In Deir el-Medina, the village of workers who built the royal tombs, ostraca, shards of limestone or pottery, have been found etched with explicit sketches. Some are humorous, others are deeply sensual, and some downright tender. One shows a woman mounting a man, her hair spilling forward as he gazes up at her, Another depicts two lovers tangled in a bedsheet, their bodies soft, not stylized. There's intimacy in the gesture, in the curve of a back, in the way a hand cups a shoulder, not for balance, but connection. These images weren't displayed in public halls or temple facades, but they existed, quietly, persistently. They spoke to something unchanging. That desire was not a distraction from life. It was part of it. Historians still argue whether these depictions were meant purely for pleasure or served ritual purposes, perhaps invoking fertility or abundance in the afterlife. Some argue they were included to ensure the deceased could continue enjoying physical pleasure for eternity. Others believe they were simply expressions of what mattered most in living memory. You touch the edge of one wall painting, careful not to disturb the flaking pigment. A woman reclines beneath a date palm, feeding her partner a fig. It's not erotic in the obvious sense, but it's charged with something else, anticipation, maybe. A slow kind of longing that doesn't need to be spelled out. Even in their portrayal of sensuality, the Egyptians were never crude. Their lines were elegant, their colors warm. What we might call erotic was, to them, just another facet of pleasure, connection, and continuation. Back in the open air, you climb to a small rock ledge overlooking the floodplain. You've brought with you a worn piece of pottery discovered by a local farmer. It's a rough sketch, a woman with wide hips and exaggerated eyes, dancing before a man who appears utterly transfixed. It's crude in style, but playful, confident. Someone drew this not to scandalize, but to amuse. Or maybe to remember. You think of a young artist, tucked in a corner of a workshop, sketching between shifts, not for the gods, not for royalty, but for himself, for laughter, for longing, for the image of a lover he hasn't seen in weeks. Erotica in ancient Egypt wasn't just about anatomy, it was about intention, about expressing what could not be said in official prayers or tomb inscriptions. What wasn't appropriate in public could still be carved into the base of a mirror, or tucked into a basket beside a lover's favorite perfume. And sometimes, it was practical. Midwives and healers included sexual positions in medical papyri, not for titillation, but for guidance, advice, help. They recorded what brought pleasure, what encouraged conception, what calmed anxiety. It wasn't sacred or shameful. It was simply acknowledged. You walk through the artisan's village again as the moon climbs higher. Behind one home, etched into the plastered wall, is a tiny image. Two figures curled together beneath a palm leaf. Hidden in a corner, only the most curious would ever notice. You smile. There are truths we paint boldly, and others we tuck into corners. But both kinds survive. Both kinds matter. Because in ancient Egypt, as in any place where hearts beat and hands reach, people wanted to be remembered not just for their titles or their deeds, but for how they loved, how they touched, how they smiled against someone's neck in the morning, how they danced when no one was watching, how they turned desire into something worth preserving. And in those tombs, in those worn shards and painted bed sheets, that truth lives on. Not scandalous, not obscene, just real. You step back into the city's edge, where lamps flicker again with dawn not far behind. A scribe walks past with ink on his fingers. A woman opens her shutters to let in the breeze. Life, waking once more. And behind it all, buried softly in stone and story, the quiet truth of intimacy, preserved in pigment and line, still waiting to be seen, still waiting to be felt. As dawn begins to stretch her arms across the horizon, casting the sky in streaks of rose and amber, the streets of Thebes stir once more. But now, the city hums with a different kind of rhythm, one of quiet preparation, of medicine pots opening, of morning prayers whispered, of gentle hands checking pulses, soothing aches, mixing herbs in shallow bowls. You find yourself walking toward a courtyard where two midwives are already at work. Their linen garments are simple, their faces lined with knowledge. One is braiding a woman's hair while checking her forehead for fever. The other is carefully crushing herbs in a ceramic bowl, the pestle moving in slow, practiced circles. They nod at you, but don't stop. Here, in this small, shaded corner of the world, healing is sacred, especially when it comes to love and the body. The Egyptians understood that pleasure wasn't separate from wellness. And when things went wrong, when passion turned to pain, or when desire vanished without warning, they turned to the same people they trusted to deliver children, soothe spirits, and bless unions, healers, midwives, temple attendants, and scribes of medicine. You're invited to sit beside a young girl wrapped in a soft linen sheet. She's quiet, eyes down, clearly uncomfortable. The older midwife places a warm hand on her shoulder and murmurs something reassuring. You don't catch the words, but you feel the tenderness in them. She hands the girl a bitter brew made from fenugreek, myrrh, and pounded lettuce seed. It's meant to ease cramping, they tell you, and perhaps to quiet the heart. You ask what that means. The midwife shrugs gently. Sometimes, pain lives in the belly. Sometimes, it lives in the heart. But it feels the same. You watch as she adds a few drops of honey to the cup, not for sweetness, but because honey, she explains, is healing in all things. It seals. It protects. It softens whatever it touches. The Egyptians recorded many such remedies in their medical papyri. The Ebers Papyrus, nearly 20 meters long, includes dozens of prescriptions for sexual health, ointments for vaginal dryness, oils for enhancing male potency, even pastes for awakening the desire of one whose body has grown cold. Some involved herbs, others animal fat. Still others were accompanied by incantations. One such chant reads, "May his desire rise like the flood. May her thighs open like the lotus at dawn." You smile as you hear it, half medicine, half poetry. But that was the Egyptian way. Their healers didn't divide the body from the spirit. A blocked desire might be a matter of nerves, of imbalance, or of unspoken grief. And so healing often came through ritual as much as remedy. You visit a temple where a priestess of Hathor offers healing to couples who've lost their closeness. They arrive in silence, hands barely touching, eyes clouded with distance. The priestess welcomes them not with judgment, but with scent, burning incense, crushed rose petals, and warm milk steeped with cardamom. She asks them to bathe, separately, then together, to anoint each other's skin with oil, to speak aloud 3 things they remember about when they first fell in love. Then she sings. It's not a song of worship, exactly. It's a song of invitation, calling the body back to itself, calling memory back to the surface. Not every couple leaves hand in hand, but many do. Some weep, some laugh, some say nothing at all. You're shown another ritual performed for men who've lost virility. The cause, you're told, could be physical, or it could be the evil eye, jealousy projected into the world and absorbed through the skin. A healer might tie a cord of red thread around the man's wrist and speak a spell while brushing him lightly with palm fronds dipped in Nile water. Then comes the potion: onion, honey, cumin, and ground crocodile heart. Yes, really. It's drunk under the waxing moon, preferably while standing in water. Why water, you ask? Because, the healer says, water remembers. You're not quite sure what she means, but somehow, it feels right. For women, healing could involve beeswax inserts, herbal douches, or warm poultices pressed low against the belly. But often, the most powerful treatment was simply being heard. You sit beside a girl who confides that she hasn't felt desire since the death of her mother. She thought it meant something was wrong with her. The midwife listening to her simply nods and says, "You are grieving, your body knows that, even when you do not." The girl exhales for the first time in what feels like days. Even in the realm of fertility, medicine wasn't mechanical. Couples trying to conceive weren't just given potions, they were given hope. They were invited to walk barefoot at dawn, to sleep under sycamores, to whisper prayers to Tauret or Bez while placing their hands over each other's hearts. Healing, in that world, was participatory. It wasn't just taken, it was shared. Historians still argue whether these remedies were effective in modern terms, but they miss the point. To the Egyptians, belief and biology weren't separate. A salve worked because it contained pomegranate, and because it was prepared by someone who knew your name, someone who listened, someone who mixed it under a full moon while singing your pain away. You walk into another courtyard now, where a husband rubs oil into his wife's back. She's pregnant, swollen with the weight of late months, and her groan is both weary and grateful. Nearby, a healer chants softly while tying a charm of carnelian and date fiber onto the bedpost. "Protection for the night," she says, "for the mother, and the union that made her." Not all visits to healers were so joyful. There were complications, there was heartbreak, there were questions no one could answer. But even then, the Egyptians found ways to mourn together. You're told of a ritual for couples who could not conceive, offering clay figures to the Nile at dusk, letting the current carry away their sorrow, not to forget it, but to release it, to give it form, to say, this, too, was real. The sky begins to brighten with the faintest edge of morning light now, and the midwives begin to clean their tools, wash their bowls, and whisper final blessings. And you begin to understand, healing in ancient Egypt wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about tending what was human: desire, loss, shame, longing, joy. All of it belonged, all of it deserved care. So they made their remedies with honey. They stirred in prayers. They looked you in the eye and said, "You are not alone." And somehow, in those small acts, those touchings, those murmurings, those rituals repeated through centuries, love became more than a feeling. It became a practice, a medicine, a way back to wholeness. The sun is rising now, warming the city's rooftops with the first brush of gold. You can hear roosters calling, the crack of bread ovens coming to life, and distant voices beginning the rhythm of another day. But your thoughts remain elsewhere, back in the hush of lamplit courtyards, healing chants, and clay figurines surrendered to the Nile. And as the day begins again, you realize that for the ancient Egyptians, love didn't end with the final heartbeat. Love, like the sun, was always rising again. You turn once more toward the necropolis, not with dread, but with reverence. You want to know what came after, the beliefs that carried lovers into the next life, the inscriptions left behind like breadcrumbs across time. Because if there was one thing Egyptians clung to with certainty, it was this, that the soul carried its loves into eternity. You descend into the tomb of a minor official, nestled among other modest burial chambers in the Valley of the Nobles. It's dim, but the walls are alive with color. You run your fingers lightly along the carved reliefs, scenes of banquets, fishing trips, music, and home life. But what catches your eye is a detail tucked quietly into one corner. The man is seated. His wife stands behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder, the other holding a lotus blossom near his nose. Not as an offering, but as a gesture, a private moment, a scent shared. It's not a grand pose. There are no gods flanking them, no dramatic hieroglyphs declaring conquest. Just companionship, carved into stone, a touch, a look, a flower. You pass another tomb where a woman is shown beside her husband, both of them walking toward the afterlife, hand in hand. The inscription reads, "She whom he loved most of all. May they walk together forever." You stop at that, not because it's rare, but because it's everywhere. So many tombs repeat this one truth in 1,000 ways. They chose each other, even beyond death. You visit the tomb of Sennacherib, a worker who helped build the royal tombs. His burial chamber, though small, is exquisitely decorated. Along the walls, he and his wife Ferdi are shown doing everything together, harvesting, offering, singing. In one panel, they lie side by side beneath a date palm, gazing at each other as musicians play nearby. It's an afterlife painted not in solemn silence, but in togetherness. These scenes weren't just meant to honor the dead. They were designed to continue a life the couple had already shared, a vision of eternity filled not with golden thrones, but with familiarity, softness, laughter. In another chamber, you see a curious arrangement, two women buried together, each named, each honored, no husbands mentioned. The records are sparse, the imagery gentle, two hands brushing, offerings shared, a life intertwined, perhaps sisters, perhaps friends, perhaps more. You'll never know for sure. But you've come to accept that in this culture, where the heart was weighed against a feather and the soul journeyed through rivers of fire and sky, love was never left behind. Even the very structure of Egyptian tombs speaks to that desire to preserve connection. Letters from widows to departed husbands have been found tucked into graves, written on pottery or linen, asking for help, forgiveness, or simply to be remembered. One widow wrote, "You left me too soon. My house is empty without your voice. Come to me in dreams. Let me smell your scent in the night." That letter is over 3,000 years old, and yet you feel its pulse. You walk slowly through a shaded colonnade of an open-air tomb, and your guide tells you of a ritual still practiced today by some Egyptian families, leaving food and wine for the dead, not because they need nourishment, but because love must continue to offer, even after silence, even after stone. You sit for a while at the edge of a garden where ancient tomb workers once planted fruit trees and flowers. The area has long been cleared, but faint outlines remain. Inscriptions nearby speak of fig trees planted for shade, of flowers chosen not for utility, but for beauty. Because the afterlife wasn't meant to be sterile, it was meant to be lush, sensual, familiar. You imagine a man carving those very walls centuries ago. His wife brings him a cup of beer. He wipes the sweat from his brow. They speak softly about the design of their tomb. Will she be seated beside him? Will there be music? Will someone paint her favorite necklace on the wall? He nods. Yes, of course, because she must be there. Without her, paradise would feel incomplete. Historians still argue whether the romantic imagery in these tombs reflected real emotions or simply societal ideals. But that question feels too small now. Because whether symbolic or sincere, these depictions reveal a cultural truth that to love deeply was to hope boldly. Hope that this love would last. Hope that it meant something. Hope that it might stretch across the great unknown. You pause at the tomb of a woman named Nebet. Her husband had her likeness carved beside his own. Even though they were buried years apart, he made sure her image faced him, that she would always look his way. Beneath her name, the inscription reads, "My delight, who sits beside me forever." And somehow, after all the stories, the rituals, the poems and the prayers, you begin to believe it, not because of stone, not because of ink, but because you've seen how they lived, and you've seen how they remembered. You walk back toward the Nile, its surface glowing in the dawn light, and think of all the lovers who waited in these tombs, not frozen, not forgotten, just waiting, to be seen, to be whispered about, to be held in memory. And you carry them with you now, those hands, those glances, those lotus blossoms pressed to lips. You understand, in your bones, what they knew all along, that death could not separate what love had already woven. That names carved in stone meant less than moments carved in hearts. That to walk hand in hand in this life was to ask, simply and without fear, will you walk beside me even after? And to hear, whether in words or in silence, yes, always. You sit quietly now, watching the sun climb above the low silhouettes of Thebes, casting long golden fingers across stone walls and thatched roofs. The city has fully awakened. Market stalls open with the clatter of baskets and shouts of greetings. Water jugs are filled, fires lit, but your mind drifts backward still, toward all the intimate, fragrant, tender moments you've wandered through in this ancient world. And yet, like all good journeys, this one leaves you with questions, because for all that's been uncovered, papyrus scrolls, love poems, healing spells, erotic sketches carved into tomb walls, so much remains unknown. You gaze across the river, imagining the lives behind the artifacts, the whispers left out of the record, the silences that no inscription could fully capture. What was it really like to be in love in ancient Egypt? Did the newlywed bride feel a nervous flutter as she stepped into her husband's home for the first time? Did young men rehearse romantic lines under their breath before approaching someone at the market? Did lovers argue over who left the oil lamp burning all night? Did someone, somewhere, whisper, "I missed you," in the soft blue hours before dawn? Historians still argue whether the intimacy seen in tomb art reflected lived experiences or idealized visions of domestic life. Some claim it was all symbolic, a representation of moral virtues or divine order. Others believe the depictions are literal snapshots, personal and tender. But you've felt something walking these ancient paths that no textbook quite explains. A quiet consistency of care. It lingers in the brushstrokes of a scribe who painted his wife feeding him grapes, in the choice to depict a couple reclining together under a fig tree, in a priestess's spell designed not just to bless a union, but to restore affection after years of distance. That isn't political. That isn't symbolic. That's human. Still, questions remain and always will. There are gaps in the record. Entire scrolls lost to floods, fires, and time. Rituals that were never written down because they were passed on through touch, through song, through glances and gestures. There are love stories that ended too soon, lovers buried in different tombs, names erased or never carved at all. You wonder about the relationships that didn't conform, those we might now recognize as queer or fluid or simply unconventional. Some fragments hint at them. A poem written from one woman to another. A pair of male names inscribed together on a house beam. Are these declarations, accidents, moments of rebellion, or quiet truths that no one dared speak too loudly? Historians still argue whether Egypt was more tolerant than we give it credit for, or whether modern eyes are simply reading too much into limited evidence. But you've seen how much can be hidden in the space between words. And then there are the midwives, priestesses, and healers whose names we don't know. The women who kept records no one preserved. The husbands who wrote poems but never signed them. The widows who visited tombs for years, speaking aloud to stone in the hope someone, anyone, was still listening. What did they believe happened in the moment just after death? Not in terms of judgment or rebirth, but emotion. Did they think love felt like a breeze through a shutter, a dream that returned, a sudden scent that caught them off guard? You imagine a woman grinding barley in the early morning, catching a whiff of lotus oil and pausing, heart aching, not in pain, but in remembrance. Was that her late husband saying hello? Or just a memory rising like the Nile? Historians still debate the line between ritual and belief, between what people were told and what they truly felt. But here, beneath the long shadow of ancient colonnades, it's easy to believe the line was always blurred. You wander back toward the temple gardens, where the sycamores rustle gently in the morning wind. A boy skips past you, humming something tuneless. A pair of elders sit playing a board game, their laughter soft and gravelly. A woman nurses a child, brushing a fly away with the corner of her sleeve. The world keeps moving, but the questions remain. You think about the people whose names are lost to time, not just the powerful or the poetic, but the everyday hearts that loved, worried, touched, hoped. The man who carved a small heart into the corner of his roof beam. The girl who buried a ring in the sand when her lover left. The one who waited too long to say how they felt. What happened to them? Were they comforted by ritual? Strengthened by prayer? Did they find peace in the slow tide of time? Or did they whisper to the stars every night, hoping someone would answer? You walk slower now. The day is warming, and Thebes has fully awakened. But your journey through ancient intimacy leaves a lingering echo. Because even as we study the past, decode its language, and map its rituals, the human heart continues to ask the same things. Was I truly loved? Was I truly known? Will someone remember me? And the answer, whispered across centuries in the scent of incense, the curve of painted arms, and the tenderness carved into limestone, is this: yes, yes, and yes. You may leave this place now, but part of you remains, sitting in a shaded courtyard, listening to healing chants, reading love poems by flickering oil light, watching a couple paint their tomb, deciding which memories to carry into forever. You carry those questions with you, But you also carry the answers, etched not in certainty, but in presence, in the quiet attention that says, your story matters, your love mattered, and someone, even now, is listening. And now, as the last golden traces of the Nile fade into memory, you let your breathing slow. The city of Thebes grows distant, the voices soften. The warmth of the sun gives way to the hush of night once more. Only this time, it's the quiet within you. You've wandered through temples and gardens, through perfumed chambers and moonlit courtyards. You've felt the ache of longing, the warmth of shared laughter, and the delicate hope carried between hands in the dark. You've learned something precious, that even in a world ruled by gods and gold, what mattered most was tenderness, the brush of fingers, a word spoken just before sleep, the offering of a single lotus blossom placed beside someone's bed. And now, with the weight of centuries softened into stillness, you lie back, letting the echo of this journey wash over you. Let the Nile's waters carry your thoughts gently. Let the stars overhead blink slowly, like ancient eyes watching kindly from above. You are safe here. You are remembered, and somewhere, in a painted tomb or forgotten scroll, someone once whispered the very same hopes you carry now. So close your eyes, rest, and if you dream, may it be under fig trees and soft linen, where time folds itself like a warm sheet around you. Because in the end, the past was never just history. It was humanity. It was love. And tonight, it has wrapped itself around you like a lullaby.